Hello everybody, and welcome to Haiku Talk. I'm your host, Ben Ga, your friendly neighborhood haiku poet, and today we're going to be taking a look at a piece from a new anthology called Sea Change, an Anthology of Single-Line Poems. This is a collection of single-line poems from the first several issues of Whiptail, which is an online single-line poem journal, not strictly to haiku and senryu. It's other forms of one-line poems as well. And this is a nice collection of sort of the highlights from that first run of issues 1 through 7, put together by Kat Lehman and Robin Smith, editors, and it is published by Red Moon Press. We're going to be taking a look at one of these pieces, a poem by a writer that goes by the name of R. Thomas, and the first two words of this one-line poem are the blue. With that said, you know what time it is. It's time to sit back, relax, grab yourself a tasty beverage, and let's haiku. Welcome back. It's good to be with you again for another episode. And this is a fun one because I really enjoyed this anthology. Now, I will say that I don't read Whiptail on the regular, but I do drop in from time to time and do find it a fascinating journal. And this is a great collection of sort of the best of their first 7 issues, which is really cool. And it, like I said before, it's not just haiku and senryu. It's kind of related type one-line poems. They did that to kind of make sure that the journal is open to anything that might be in the wheelhouse of a one-line haiku or senryu, but not exclusive to those things. And so as you're reading through this book, which is available again from Red Moon Press, you're going to come across all sorts of different types of poems. Some really cool concrete poems, a lot of different, some abstract things, all sorts of different types of one-liners. And you know, not everything's going to strike you, but they're all going to make you look deeper into the page regardless. And I wanted just to highlight one of the poems here that struck me. It's a poem that I have what poet Brian Rickert calls haiku envy. And it speaks to kind of the sensibilities and kind of some of the patterns and stuff that I use in my own writing. And this poem by R. Thomas goes like this. The blue swallows, the blue swallows. The blue swallows, the blue swallows. Really, really like that piece. It's fun to read, and let's break it down and show kind of how it works and why it works for me as a one-line haiku. So if we look at this piece, you know, there's kind of the fragment and the phrase that we usually see for haiku structures, or we see something called a middle pivot, which is where a middle line pivots between relating to line 1 and line 2. And this poem is more akin to that than a fragment and phrase, in that the structure kind of, we have 2 images. We have the blue as the first 2 lines, and we also have the blue swallows at the end. So you have the blue and then the blue swallows. Now the blue here, in my mind, because of how it progresses forward, and we know the full context of the poem as being blue swallows, it's the sky. So the blue, and then the sort of pivot word in here is swallows. It swallows up the blue swallows, and so the blue sky swallows up the blue swallows as they fly into it. They slowly disappear from view because they're completely enveloped by the big blue sky. And that to me is just a fun poem, and it's very visual, it's very playful, and you don't see too many poems that can successfully pull this off, where it's 6 words, every word's repeated twice, and putting in the context of this one line here as sort of like your line of sight, the blue swallows, the blue swallows. I guess you could probably repeat that in reverse and saying the blue swallows, but meaning you'd come to the same result, in that the blue sky is swallowing up the blue birds, these blue swallow birds. And it's a lot of fun, and it's got kind of a nice rhythm to it. It kind of undulates along, and it's fun to see on the page. It's fun to read out loud, and it's just an interesting technique of how that repetition changes based on the emphasis and the stop and of the words, of the context of how things play out, how the image plays out. And so rather than having that, again, that 3-line breakdown, it is in one line. For me, it works really nice because it's like a line of sight. And you see the blue, image 1, swallows, kind of your pivot of sorts, the blue swallows being your second image. And that's it. It's a nice, wonderful, sweet poem. And sometimes that is all you need to have a good bit of fun with literature. A very nice read, a very good image. I'm taken outside. I can see this. It's very visual. It's very crisp. It's very clear. And it makes me, wish I would have written this, because this is a very fun poem, just in the way it's constructed and the way that it uses language. And that is just one of 84 poems in this wonderful collection from Red Moon Press. Like I said, you can buy it right there, redmoonpress.com. And please do check out the journal, Whiptail, www.whiptail.com, to get that, to read every issue. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you very much, Kat and Robin, for putting together a wonderful book. It's going to live on my bookshelf and will be read many times, as all good books are. And I do want to just say a little bit about reading anthologies, reading books like this. It's got a brief little foreword by Jim Cation of the Haiku Foundation and Red Moon Press, which kind of gives it a little bit of context. There's some nice afterwords in here as well. And what's cool about this book is, it is a nice square book, which is cool. It does go alphabetical, but you don't necessarily know that because there's no names on the pages of this book. So what that means is you just get to enjoy the poem as it is. And then when you want to figure out who wrote it, you go to the back of the index and you can see what page number belongs to what poet. Very cool layout. I like that. And what's nice, too, is that you don't get necessarily distracted by the names as you're going through, because it is in alphabetical order by poet, but you don't know that until you look at the index in the back. And so, yeah, it's a very cool thing. And so it's also nice about these kinds of dealios is that if you like a poem or poems, check back in the index, find the poet, and then once you find that you like that poet, Google that poet's name, see what else comes up. Where else have they been published? What else have they published? And then you start your little journey down a fandom to individual poems, individual poets. Many of this probably have a book or two at Red Moon Press. And it's just a good thing to come back to. I know tastes change. Like when you read this, I'm going to be rereading this book. I'm excited about rereading it in different contexts of my life down the road, because every time I reread a book, there are those poems that I like every time, and then some poems that I discover again, because whatever was happening in my life when I read the book the first time, the poem didn't hit me. But now suddenly, time has passed, different season, different time of day, different things going on in my life, and suddenly another poem really hits me. And just as a trait that I do for myself is I'll put a tick mark next to the poems that I like, such as, this one. You can see it on the page, hopefully. Hopefully. You see the little tick mark that I got there, little line. And every time I read the book, if I like this poem each time, I'll add another tick mark. So I can pick up this book, flip through it, and say, like, yeah, I've read this book 3 times. There are 3 tick marks on all my favorite poems. And if I want to put a comment or write something cool about the poem or a thought about the poem, or maybe it reminds me of another poem of one of mine or something like that, if I put a note in the book, and I tend to write in all of my books, I'll put the date and I'll put the location of that book, of where I am when I'm reading this book and writing that comment. And what you'll find is when you go back to that book again later on, you'll stumble upon your comments, and then you look back and you're like, oh, look, that's Ben from 2017 reading that book in an airport, or reading that book, sitting in a cafe somewhere on this night. And it takes you back to that place. It takes you back to that person you were at that time. And you think, wow, that person in that version of Ben in 2017 was unaware of what was going to come next in that next year. In 2017, he wasn't aware there'd be a pandemic and blah, 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 all these things, It's kind of a fun little dialogue with yourself that you have. So these books, very important to have in your collection, very important to read once, very important to reread. And not just reread once or twice, but reread several times as the years go by. So they truly are treasures. And when I'm sitting down to write myself, I will often have a journal or a book, something like this that I'm reading through, and I'll start reading first, and then lo and behold, I'll start writing. And many, many times I find the answers to the problems that I'm having with the poem I'm working on from other poets in these books and anthologies. Yes, another one from the bookshelf. So thank you very much for tuning in once again to Haiku Talk. Look forward to seeing you again. Until next time, be well, like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications when new episodes drop. Till then, cheers, everybody.